Okay, let us look into if statements and forced unwrapping. In the previous video, we're talking about nil. Now, we're gonna look into if statements and forced unwrapping. I don't know what forced unwrapping is. I know what an if statement is, but forced unwrapping, not so common with this term. You can use an if statement to find out whether an optional contains a value by comparing the optional against nil. You perform this comparison with the equal to operator or not equal to operator. If an option has a value, it's considered to be not equal to nil. Okay, cool. Let's see how we can do that. Well, the first thing that we're going to need to do is to declare an optional. Let us write down an optional for ourselves. Righty. Let us write down an optional. So how are we going to, which optional? Okay, so I'm going to say a variable, and then I'm going to say test nil, and then let's make it a string. For now, we're going to give it a value. Okay, this is not nil, right? And then we can go for an if statement. If test nil is not nil, print not nil. Okay, cool. So we can see here not nil. But then what is this warning here? Comparing non-optional value of type string to nil always returns true. Okay, that's a good point there because, okay, that's a very good point. I like that. It's so true. Because how can I say this? It's like, you know, when you can hear that an object is not, okay, maybe I'm just trying to over sophisticate this, but then, okay, I'm just thinking of a glass of water. If you know the glass of water has substance inside of it, and you try, and then you say, does this glass of water have substance? For the fact that you always know that there's no option that it can be empty, the answer will always be true, that the glass has substance inside of it. Okay, well, I feel like I just confused every, well, I just tried. But anyway, now there's options to the string. Test nil can either be populated, meaning it has a value, or it may be empty. Those are the two options that we may have with a string here. Hence now the warning goes away. So now in order for us to test if anything contains a nil, it means the variable must be defined as an optional. It must have the characteristics of an optional. Let's see what term they use here. You can use a nil if state. You can use an if statement to find out whether an option contains a value by comparing the option against nil. You perform this comparison with the equal to operator or the not equal to operator. If an option has a value, it's considered to be not equal to nil. Okay, so now I like how they're called options here. Once you are sure, I'm reading here now. Okay, once you are sure that the optional does contain a value, you can access its underlying value by adding an exclamation point. Okay, once you are sure that an optional does contain a value, for example, in our case here, we see that this optional does indeed contain a value and we're sure about it. So now that means it yields a true. we do see that it has a value. The exclamation point effectively says, I know that this optional definitely has a value. Please use it. This is known as forced unwrapping of optional value. Okay, let's read this again. Once you're sure that the optional does contain a value, you can access its underlying value by adding an exclamation point. Okay, well, that makes sense. Okay, let's test this and see what we mean by this. First of all, we can see that this has a value. So now what happens if I want to print test nil? But then we do know that test nil has a value inside of it. So wouldn't it Okay, I see it now. So in order for us to access the value that is inside text nil, we need to use an exclamation mark. I think that's what it's called, right? Let us see here. Okay, the exclamation point effectively says, I know this optional definitely has a value. Please use it. This is known as forced unwrapping. Okay, forced unwrapping of the optional value. So what is forced unwrapping? In my own sense, in my own way, I'll say forced unwrapping is, in other words, unwrapping the value that is within an optional. So what is forced unwrapping? In my own opinion, I'll say forced unwrapping is unwrapping a value that is within an optional. And I will go for that for now. If convert number is not nil, print converted number has an integer value of the value that we just talked about there. And obviously we use this exclamation point to unwrap the optional's value. Okay, cool. For more information about the if statement, see control flow. Trying to use exclamation point to access a non. Okay, trying to use the exclamation point to access a non-existent optional value triggers a runtime error. Always make sure that an optional contains a non-nil value before using an exclamation point to force unwrap its value. Okay, fair point. I see that. I see that. I see where we're going here. I see what we're doing here. All right, cool. Fair point. So that's it here. If statements and forced unwrapping. So we're gonna move on to optionals. Optional binding. We'll see what this does here. All right, cool. Cheers, guys.